In the previous video, we placed our motifs. They've got sticky fusible on the back. I'll often say, finger press on what I'm saying is just push them down. The light Steam-A-Seam 2 fusible, which was included on the back of these, is the only fusible on the market that you cannot overwork. It means you can't iron it too much, you can't handle it too much. It stays with its properties of sticky and repositionable until you steam fuse it in place. And we're at the steam fuse phase. So I'm going to move this and set up an ironing station. You do need access to an iron at the cotton setting. Even though there's a wool setting, I'm going to suggest that you move up to your cotton setting. So an access to an iron. If you're not familiar, if you're one of our young people under about the age of 14, I really need you to be supervised for using the iron step. They are very hot. I want your opportunity and time with the project to be fun, and so I don't want to hear that you burned yourself with the iron. So please be careful. Please get help with it if it's not something that you're familiar with or using. I asked you to assemble some pressing things. You need an iron, so here's mine. You need access to water. It may be a jug of spring water or distilled water, depending on your kind of iron. But since this is a stay-at-home and stitch, and maybe for beginners or you haven't done this kind of applique before, I like to keep it really simple. And I use a lot of kitchen or stay-at-home things. So you need access to water. Maybe you've got a good spray bottle. That's what this is. If you don't have access to a spray bottle for water, then I asked you in the directions to just collect a coffee mug and fill it, maybe about a third of the way up, not more than a half, with water. I also asked you to have access to a press cloth, and that's just a piece of cotton fabric that doesn't look like much. Maybe dad or grandpa, great-grandpa has an old white cotton hanky, or handkerchief. That would be awesome. I do usually stick with a white or off-white one just in case. And also, most of the time you can kind of see through it a little bit, and that's another reason why I stick with a white or off-white one. So very simple. This just happens to be an extra piece of fabric. So I'm going to set these aside for a minute and bring up my pressing station, and we'll talk about pressing your motifs to make them permanently attached to this portion of your fun pouch. I do happen to own a wool pressing sheet for our quilt, our novice or experienced quilters out there. If you do any kind of piecing, applique, this thing is awesome. So you might consider adding it to your notions or tools bag of tricks. So this is my wool pressing surface. I'm going to return the pouch motif back here. The most important thing that you need to understand about light Steam-A-Seam 2 working with wool is probably two things. Number one, the directions that come with it are not accurate for working with wool. So if you've purchased this kit or any of the kits, in there I have included a notions fact sheet that talks about how to use this project. I also go through my pressing simulation in your step 5 of the written directions for the fun pouch. So here we go. So that was one tip. Directions may not be accurate for working with wool. The second tip is wool loves steam. In order to really get these motifs pressed down, and when we press them down, we're talking permanent. Notice that it looks like I've nearly smashed the orange pre-fused straps onto those flip flops. It irons in really good. It should be permanent if your pressing has been accurate. So that was the second thing. It loves steam. Now some of you may have an iron that already puts out steam, and we know that by the holes. If you're purchasing an iron to do applique or wool applique, the more holes, steam holes, the better. Again, if you've just got a dry iron or an old iron, you're good. As long as it gets hot on the cotton setting, all you need is this dampened press cloth and some water. That's it. So in my directions for number 5, I say dampen your press cloth in water till it's nearly dripping. So look at me, I'm squeezing a little bit of water out so that it's not dripping, but it's awful close. I'm going to open up my wad of press cloth here, and again, it's just a scrap of cotton fabric. That's all it is. And I'm going to lay it down over the motif like that. And note I said I use off-white and white, and it's a little bit see-through. So I can see that for the most part, I'm pretty secure that I didn't move anything while I was putting that press cloth down. The simulation that I want you to follow is understanding first what pressing is. It's up and down motion. It's not a scrubbing motion. And then second, that the steam to hold the fusible down, we need a lot of it. It probably needs to be 7 to 10 seconds in order to get it down really, really good. So my pressing simulation one more time is to dampen a press cloth to nearly dripping, lay it over the motifs to be pressed, and iron until you see the press cloth over the motifs go dry. So it will change color. So just watch. And I'm going to just lay it down. You don't feel like you have to cover the whole thing at once. I'm just going to do maybe a third of it. I'm going to work on fun first. And you should hopefully hear that it's kind of feeling sizzly. I'm putting pressure, pushing down on my iron, and then I'm going to lift up. That's pretty good. I can see that it's dry here, but it's not dry enough right there. So I'm going to put it back down. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. I'm going to look again. I think I just about have it, but I want it to be down 7 to 10 seconds, and this might even turn into 15 over this area. Not a problem. You cannot hurt it. I'm going to do it again. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, and I'm lifting up. You can definitely see the shape of my iron right there, and that portion of my press cloth is definitely dry, correct? I'm going to just lift it up so that you can see it. There you go. Okay. And I'm going to do that 2 or 3 more times. Maybe I can get the last 2 pieces at the same time. So I'm going to put my iron down, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, lift it up. Not dry enough yet, and that's a stacked motif, so it's going to take a little longer. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. I'm going to look again. And for good measure, it still seems damp right here, and that's the end of my flower. I'm going to go 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. So note that your directions said 7 to 10 seconds. It may need 15. It may need a little extra time because this blanket is pretty thick. I'm going to lift that up so that you can see it. And I'm just gonna and let it dry. So imagine I've let it dry for about 2 minutes before I've got my fingers in there to touch it, okay? But I'm just gonna kind of use a fingernail and see if I can lift it. It seems like it's lifting a little bit, which is not uncommon, again, because this background is so thick that I'm gonna go to a different spot on this press cloth, happens to be long enough, and I'm gonna repeat it again. Don't worry that you've overworked the fusible. Again, with the Light Steam-A-Seam 2, it's the only one on the market that you cannot hurt by what you might think is overpressing. So we're going to do all that again. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. And I'm lifting up again. My iron's not big enough, so you can see I've got to come over this area. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. And I'm lifting again. I'm just going to make sure I've got all these parts at the top all done. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. All right, let's let that cool a little bit. And I'm just going to talk about properties of wool. Wool happens to be a very interesting fiber to use. One of the things that I've learned is that wool can actually absorb up to 30% of its weight in water. So for example, if this whole blanket piece for your pouch weighed 3 ounces, it'll hold nearly an ounce of water. That's quite a bit. That's several spoonfuls of water that it just absorbs. And then when our air gets too dry in our home or outside, it actually allows that to go away. So it has the capability to take on moisture and then to give it back into the environment if the environment's too dry. And I find that to be a very interesting property of wool. Now again, because this is so thick, we've got 2 stacked layers here and here, and this is pretty thick to make it something that is really stable enough and heavy enough to hold up as a pouch that you're going to handle a lot. I'm going to actually turn the whole thing over, and I know that I'm working, you know, that 1/3. So I might even just kind of give myself a little mark again, and I'm going to repeat that again. Now, if you're working from a spray bottle, that is awesome too. Simply put your dry press cloth down there and saturate it until you've got enough moisture on there. Now, you'll note that that's going to take me a while. So you can understand why, you know, something as low tech as a cup with water in it works for me. See, it's going to take quite a bit of water to get that thing wet enough that you see the color change back to wet. And then we're going to iron that down again. And again, don't worry if it's too wet. You're in 5 to 7 second intervals. You're pressing that until it's dry. So let's do that again. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. Now you saw me moving it like this. That's the scrubbing part I actually don't want you to do, but we're on the wrong side. There's no motifs to move, so that's not as big a problem. But do get in the habit of not doing what I just did and get in the habit of pressing down, apply some pressure, 5 seconds, pick it up. Place it down, apply some pressure, 5 seconds, and then pick it up. And do give this a time to cool. If you can just walk away from it for a few seconds and let it cool all the way down so that we know that it has really sent some moisture and heat through the project. But I do want you to allow it to be cool enough to touch. It cools off pretty quickly. And then I'm going to just turn it over again. And then before we start doing any stitching, truly allow this to cool all the way back to room temperature, if you would, please. And that was our steam fusing. Now, as you stitch and handle this and manipulate it, if you find any of your motifs want to get up and walk away, go back to step 5, dampen your press cloth, and repeat those steps and iron it again, about 10 to 15 seconds over each motif. Again, you cannot over iron it. Some people say, but it looks too much smashed. Go back to what I mentioned about the properties of wool. Over time, it will absorb moisture out of your environment and our applique will pluff back up. Just you stitching on it, it being exposed to the environment as it gets more and more humid over our summer. It doesn't hurt it, and you'll see the motifs look less flat and a little bit more plump over time. So don't worry, you haven't over ironed it. You've simply placed these motifs down so that they're down secure enough. We don't need any pins. We're just getting ready for the next step, which is preparing your floss and your chenille needle for stitching. Thank you again for joining us